Online 2025, comparing jobs, now called sub-customers, with projects. Get ready and some coffee because we're learning how to save time with QuickBooks Online 2025. Here we are in our QuickBooks Online Get Great Guitars 2025 project file we set up in a prior presentation. Let's open up those major financial statement reports. The reports are on the left-hand side. We're in the standard reports under the favorites. Right-click in the balance sheet to open a link in a new tab. Right-click in the profit and loss, otherwise known as the income statement, to open a link in a new tab. Let's tab to the middle, close up that ham boogie, so we have some more dance floor to boogie on, baby. Changing the range, going from 010125 tab, 013125 tab. Run it so it's refreshed it. Tabbing it to the right. Closing up the ham boogie once again, and we're going dancing around, going 010125 tab, 013125 tab. Run it to refresh it. All right, we're now going to be thinking about the concept and how to enter jobs, which are now called sub-customers in QuickBooks Online, and how they compare and contrast to projects. So I want to give a general overview, noting that this course is not specifically on a job cost system, although we will do some data input to a few jobs so we get the idea of how jobs work and how to compare and contrast the different tools such as jobs and projects. We have a whole nother course or section on a job cost system in particular, noting that as a bookkeeper, that's another area of basically specialization oftentimes, because it has a whole nother, there might be a whole nother kind of revenue recognition concept for certain job cost systems, such as long-term jobs like construction. Why? Because normally we recognize revenue when the revenue is earned. But what if you're doing like a job that's going to take multiple years? Then the question is, well, I'm going to have to get paid throughout that time frame in order to be able to maintain and buy the expenses and whatnot. Should I wait until the building has been constructed before recording any revenue? Or should I have some kind of revenue recognition during the construction of the job using possibly like a percentage of completion type of method? So again, that's a specialty area in and of itself, which is an opportunity for some people and something that you might want to kind of avoid for other people. In other words, as a bookkeeper, you want to know, what do I specialize in? Where do I have a competitive advantage? And either that's going to be in a more specialized, complex area like a job cost system, or possibly automating everything, not taking on those complex clients and saying no to them, which is difficult. That's what I always have problems doing, saying, what, you can't do it? You don't know how to do it? I could probably do it, but that's not the system I have, all right? And so I want to get everything lined up to the system that fits into the system. I have enough already. I've got enough, right? So that's going to be difficult to do. So that's going to be the idea. That said, some job cost systems are easier than others. So like you can also say that like an accounting firm or a law firm or possibly like a landscaper might also have a kind of job cost system, but it mainly be like a service-based kind of business, as opposed to construction, where you have a lot of like equipment and supplies that you have to basically deal with. So that's the general idea. Now, the tools that could be available to us, it used to be called jobs. In a prior accounting system, we called them jobs, meaning you might have a customer and then multiple jobs. When you move into QuickBooks Online, they renamed them from some reason from jobs to sub-customers. And we also have another functionality of the use of projects. So if I go to the left, and we now have this tab on the right called projects, which is typically used once again for a job cost system. Often the projects then taking the place of the jobs kind of in a job cost system, although there are some cases where you might use both of them. So I want to give a word of caution here. If you're transferring from like a desktop version like QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, and you're using a job cost system in which you have jobs, which are sub-customers, then it's not as you, what you want to do is go into QuickBooks Online, and QuickBooks Online, you might want to use the functionality of projects, because the projects have some cool features for a job cost system that might be better than the sub-customers or jobs. But that means that you have to convert it from the jobs to the sub-customers. So that's a specialized kind of system. And so they've been working on how to make that as clean as possible. This course isn't going to specialize in on that process, but I just want to have you beware of that. If you're thinking, I'm going to go into QuickBooks Online so that I can use the projects system instead of the old jobs system in QuickBooks Desktop, you want to take into consideration how exactly you're going to do the conversion from QuickBooks Desktop going into QuickBooks Online, which you would think would convert it to a sub-customer, which is equivalent to the jobs on the desktop, and then convert that into projects instead of sub-customers because they're not the same thing. So it's not the smoothest of conversions, although it might be worthwhile to make the change to be able to do things in projects, which is now kind of taking over the jobs for the most part. Now, again, if you're in a construction company, then you could run it either way. You can run by projects, or you might be able to run a job cost system with the use of sub-customers, which used to be called jobs. And for the most part, the projects are usually the ones that are going to be better, right, between the two of them. That's why they made the new tab, so you have more functionality. Although, again, there are some cases where you might use both. For example, if there's like a billing situation, you can change the billing address on the sub as a sub customer, and then also have a project that's going to be tied to it. Would be another way that you can do it. Now, one other thing I want to point out is that now that we have all these different kind of cool tools with QuickBooks, there's often questions in terms of which tool should I use. So now if you have a job cost system, there's a question of, do I use sub-customers, which used to be the jobs, or do I now use this projects? Usually in that case, you would think the projects would be a better way to go. We also have other things that you might be thinking about as projects, meaning you might be saying, well, I'm doing, what if I have this certain thing that I'm running like a revenue generation campaign or something like that. That seems like it would be like a project that we would be putting together, and you would think maybe I should make a project out of that because I'd like to look at the revenue for that particular thing. That's not usually what the projects are for. What you might use better for that, meaning if I go to the income statement, I might want to break out the income statement, possibly not by customer, but by this particular project. I mean, this particular, well, you could call it a project, right? This campaign I've put together. And in that case, you might better be using tags, which allows you to break out the income statement by the items that were tagged. Or, for example, you might have different departments in the business, and you might want to be breaking out on your income statement how much revenue was generated by the different departments. And you might think that projects might be something that you can do to do that, but no, usually you would want to be using, in that case, the what do they call? I forgot. Class tracking and location tracking. So that's the other one that you can kind of keep in mind. So what's going to happen is that oftentimes we're looking at the income statement. If we're thinking about jobs or projects, then usually what we're doing is trying to break out the income statement by basically customer, which we have now defined more tightly to be jobs, right? So I can list the income statement, breaking it out in essence by customer. That's one way that I can do it, or by job. But I could also try to break out the income statement having columns up top by what we call class tracking or location tracking or tags. We have another course or section on those items if you want to look at them in more detail, and we go into more detail when you might use one or the other. I just want to point out now that it can be a little bit overwhelming because you have all these cool tools and there's a lot of overlap in when you might use one or the other. And so you want to put a significant amount of thought into, before you start doing anything, what specifically is the thing that you're going to be using to do it? What's the cost of that thing? Meaning, do you have to pay more for a more advanced version? We're using the main or middle QuickBooks Pro version here, which I believe has class tracking, location tracking, tags, although you might have more tag categories, but it has a significant amount of tag categories, and it currently also has the projects as well as sub-customers. So you have all those kind of options. All right, so given that, let's give an idea of what we're talking about here. Let's go to the first tab, and we're going to go into the sales area, which you could call the customer center. I'm going to close up the hamburger, and then within the customers, these are all of our particular customers. Now, we could possibly run an income statement by customer, right? So if I went over here, I can run my income statement instead of on totals by customer. Boom. And so now you've got the income broken out by customer. Now, if you're in a job cost system, however, it's possible that you have multiple jobs for one customer. So you might be doing a patio for the customer if you did construction, and you might also be building a fence, which you might think of as a different job in a different story or a different location, and so on and so forth. So typically then we can't just use the customers. We want to break it out in more detail with the use of jobs, which we're going to call now sub-customers. So that's one way that we can do it. Now, again, we could do it by sub-customer, or we can do it by the new system, which is projects. Both of them are basically connected to a customer. And that's why the projects don't really work well for things that aren't connected to a customer. In other words, if you had a special event and you want to track the revenue like this separate column system for that separate event, if you wanted to use the projects system, you would have to tie that event to a customer, right? Which doesn't really make sense. It's the event isn't for a particular customer. It's a separate, basically, event. So again, in that case, you might use something different. You might use tags, or you might use class tracking in that case, which is another way that you can break out your income statement by those items instead of by customer. All right, so then let's go back to the left, and let's first just think about the sub-customer. Once again, this being the kind of outdated one, but the thing that would be used if you pulled in this information of a job cost system that you had on the desktop version, because the desktop version doesn't have projects, but has jobs, which are now called sub-customers in QuickBooks Online. All right, so let's do a sub-customer for Jones Guitars. So I'm going to go into, what I'm going to do is have underneath this, I want to have an indented customer, and I'm just going to have a customer number for it that will be connected to Jones Guitars. So Jones Guitars wants a new thing for our guitar project or whatever, and we're going to make a sub-customer. Okay, so how do I do that? I can go up top, and I can say I want to have a new customer, like normal, any customer, and I'm just going to give them a number, 3005, we're going to say. Now, again, I could make that name more detailed for the project that we're doing or whatever, but I'm just going to give a general number. I'm just going to give it the general number for my purposes, and then we're going to say that it is a sub-customer. That's the thing that's new. That's the thing that's different. And then, of course, if I make it a sub-customer, I have to make it a sub-customer of the parent, which I'm going to say is Jones Guitars. So Jones Guitars is the customer. Sub-customer, of course, means we have to make it a sub of the parent. Now, the bill parent, noting I'm saying that all of these jobs are going to be billed to the same parent company. I just simply want to track them differently in a job cost system because I have a long-term system that I'm trying to use to see when the job is complete. So usually I'm going to bill the parent customer, although in some cases you might not want to bill the parent customer and then have a sub-customer. This is normally where you might combine sometimes the sub-customers and the projects. So in other words, a project is going to be lined up in a similar way, although in a different field, it's going to be connected to a customer. But what if you wanted a different billing address or something like that? That's when you might actually make a sub-customer that has the different billing address so that you can attach it to the project, right? And so that's when you could have a combination of the customer and sub-customer. But that's it. I'm just going to save it and close it. And then I should see down here that we have then, now it took me into it, so I'm going to go back to the customer field. So now we have Jones Guitars and the sub-customer. So now when I make an invoice, I could invoice Jones Guitar directly, or if it's a job cost system, typically I won't be invoicing the client, but will be invoicing the jobs that I've set up as subsidiaries of the sub-customer or the projects, which we'll take a look at shortly. All right, let's try one more. I'm going to put another one for Sam the Guitar Man. I'm just going to put another job for that one. So I'm going to say new, and it's going to be 4002, 002, that's 002. And then I'm just going to say sub-customer Sam the guitar man. Boom. And then make it billable to the parent. Okay, save it. And then it takes me into the customer. So there we have it, Sam the guitar man. I'm going to go back to the customers, and now you can see the sub-customers as indented under the parent. All right, so now let's do a similar thing, and I'm going to pretend that we didn't do the jobs here, right? And say instead of using the sub-customer or jobs, we're going to use projects. Projects is similar, but it's not going to be in the same area. Like you would think, because the projects is still connected to the customers, you would think the projects would be somewhere in the sales tab in the customers, but no, they have a whole separate area to track it, which gives us some more functionality to track the information. So I'm going to go open up the ham boogie, and let's go down to projects. So I'll close up the ham boogie. It says, run your projects with confidence. Make better decisions by knowing how your projects are doing. You can see the workflow here. Profitability in one place. Keep track of your labor costs. Eliminate the guesswork. By the way, the labor cost is one of the areas where the projects might be better than the sub-customers. That's because one of the issues is when you're trying to apply out a job, you might have contractors that are applied to the job, and you're trying to basically apply the expenses that you're paying to a particular job, but it becomes a mess when they're employees. Why? Because you have to run the employee process within QuickBooks, which is a whole other widget. They have the payroll that's going to be coming out in terms of payroll taxes and whatnot, which really muddies up the allocation of expenses to a particular job. So you need more complex integration, which is one of the things that the projects might be able to do a little bit better than simply the sub-customers, which used to be the jobs. So let's go ahead and start a project. So now we're going to run the project, start a project. I thought I already said that. Let's start a project, and we're going to say that this is going to be, I'm just going to call it generically Project 1. Now, again, I might name the projects in a similar fashion in practice to what I would have done for my jobs, meaning instead of Project 1, I would call it 4005, whatever, and then maybe some detail on the actual project, repairing a roof or whatever it may be. But I'm still going to need, notice the asterisk, required field. I still need the parent company, which I'm going to say is Jones Guitars. So notice Jones Guitars has a sub-customer, meaning I could tie the project out to the sub-customer. But right now I'm just going to tie it to the parent customer. So notice that is required. Although I'm not in the customer area, I can't do a project without tying it to a customer. So that's why it's different than using like class tracking or location tracking, which breaks out the income statement not by customer and or job, but rather by whatever we tie it to in terms of the class. I have to add another field to put all the classes in. So then we have the start time. The start, let's just make it 010125, and I don't know the end point. And then the status is either going to be in progress, not started. So if you have a job cost system, normally you might have it not started because you might just be setting up the project possibly to do an estimate, which doesn't actually record anything. And then once you start the job, then you would make it in progress. So it's work that is in progress. We're not done with it. And then it's either going to be completed or canceled to show us the status so we can sort our projects in terms of, are we still working on it? Have we started it? Have they been completed? Did we stop because the client stopped paying us or something like that, and so on. So address for this project, billing address, I'll turn that off. I'm just going to save it. And so now we're going to have our project laid out. So notice this takes us into the project. Here's your project at a glance page. So I'm going to close this and just go back real quick. Notice I have the internal buttons in here. So I'm going to go back to the all projects. So now here's my intro page whenever I go in to projects. So now I have my intro page status drop down. So it's going to default to the in progress ones because, of course, those are the ones that we're going to be most concerned with. And then we have the customers. All customers will typically be the default. End date, we might want to sort them by the date. and then see info on cost, payroll expenses that we could sort by. And then we have our projects. We can pin the project if we need to. There's the customer that it's tied out to. Gives us a quick little bar of the income and costs assigned to a particular project. This will mean that when I start to enter like expense forms and income forms, I can add the project line. So I can add the project number. So in other words, if I was to go into like an expense form, then I can go into this. You'll recall that I had this customer area before, but now when I select this drop down, I'm not doing it because I want to turn around and invoice them necessarily. I'm doing it because I want to apply the expense to the project. So if I bought supplies for either job, I can assign it to the job. We'll do this later, 3005, or if it was to the project, I can assign it to the project. So I need this added field so that now it'll pull into the project, giving me like a separate kind of income statement per project. All right, so I'm going to close this back out and then say close this back out. And so that's going to be that. All right, and then we have up top, we have get started with projects. Here's your video feedback, manage settings, set cost rate, and then new project versus convert from sub-customers. Here's that conversion process. So remember, if you have sub-customers from the prior accounting system, it's most likely going to be a more complex process to get them into projects, which is most likely where you want them to be. You might have to pull them in as sub-customers and then convert the sub-customers to projects. So in any case, let's go into the project now. So if I go into the project, we have the status. We can change the status if it was then closed or whatever. They give us this nice little bar for a quick view of the income and expenses on a particular project, the profit margin, the open invoices, overdue invoices, and then our tabs here for the overview costs. We have the income costs, and then on the income side, we have the invoices. On the time, we've got hours and expense form and bill forms. So notice that when I enter things for a particular job, I could still go up top as we did before and enter an expense. Say I'm paying for supplies for a particular job and add then the customer. But I also might go into expenses here, and then it should already populate the customer field, which might make it a little bit nicer. Now, obviously, if you're using the electronic transfers, it's going to come through the bank feeds, and you're going to have this added issue of as it comes through the bank feeds, you need to assign out the customers properly if you're using a job cost system. So that's just something that you'll have to keep in mind there if you're using that. And then you've got the transaction tab, the time activity, the project reports. So this will give you reports for internal reports. And then you've got the project details, and you've got the attachments. Now notice one of the things that is important when you're running reports oftentimes for a job cost system is that you would like to have the internal reports breaking out the information by job, but I'd like a report similar to this, right? Which is going to be breaking out all of my jobs that I can sort, at least the open jobs, right? So that I can match, so that I can tie out all the jobs to what I'm reporting on my financial statements. So we might take a look at that concept more in future presentations as we kind of practice the data input into particular projects. Right now, we're just kind of setting them up. So let's do another one. I'm going to go back to my projects, and then I'm going to add a new project. This time, I'm going to just call it Project 2 generically. And I'm going to put Sam, the guitar man, after it, just so I can tie that one out to the customer. And then I'm going to say this has a required field, which will be, of course, Sam, the guitar man. So we're going to tie it out to the customer, not the sub-customer that we set up. And then this is going to be 010125 again, no end date. Once again, it's in progress. I'll save it. That takes me into the project. And then I'm going to go back to all projects. And now, of course, we have these two projects which are now available to us. So now remember that Normally, I wouldn't set up sub-customers and projects unless I had that date issue. But when we do data input in the future, we'll post to the projects and the sub-customers to get a feel for the pros and cons and differences of the two of them. So we have these two or projects versus in the sales area, we have the customers and we have the sub-customers. Now, one more thing to note on when you might use one or the other. If you have what we're using here, which is the recommended QuickBooks Online, then you have availability to the projects and sub-customers. If you use a prior version because you want it to be cheaper, then possibly you might not have access to the projects, but might still have access to the sub-customers. So it might be a little cheaper if you don't need all the detail of the projects, but you want to track sub-customers in some cases. It might have all you need to do that, and you might be able to do it a little bit more cheaply. Although one of the advantages for more complex job cost systems of moving from desktop to online is people like the projects, right? They want to go into the projects oftentimes because they want to get possibly the more advanced reports or advanced reports within projects, but also possibly because of that payroll thing, the complexities of payroll and assigning payroll costs to projects.